Okay, we've got more people in now, and I want to say my name is Mike, and I'm very happy to have my new friend, Radovanovic, as our guest today. We met last week, and oh my goodness, I fell in love immediately. I fell in love with his passion for asset management, which we share. So that's we're buddies that way. But before we get into the talk with Robert, we're going to thank our patron members and our organizational members, without whose support we're not able to provide these programs. And we said that 2022 was going to be a breakout year for the ALN, and we've got so much going on. It's actually happening. So we're going to be having a roundtable on February 28th with these speakers and more: how to achieve long-term success with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That should be spectacular. And then we're starting a municipal asset management leadership web series on bringing a world of experience to U.S. local government. And that's in conjunction with our new member, Ascetic, by Dude Solutions. And our first program is with Ashay Prabhu, founder and president of Ascetic, on a proven approach to using asset management to solve fiscal problems related to assets. I've seen a bit of it, and it's exactly what the U.S. needs. So we're very happy to be starting it off with a theoretic overview, but then we quickly get into the city of Greater Geelong, Australia, who is using these processes. And Michelle Walker, met her earlier this week also. She's got over a dozen years of experience with municipalities in Australia, and has worked in the US as a consultant in other places. She's going to bring a wealth of experience and insights to us. And then we have our ALN Winter Summit to the Sustainable Value Creation from Infrastructure Asset Leadership. And just today, John Weiss, the chairman of the Michigan Infrastructure Council, agreed to give the keynote, which will be followed up by a discussion on more details about the Michigan Infrastructure Council, which is providing free asset management training to all of the infrastructure owners in Michigan. Doesn't matter who you are, if it's your own infrastructure or public infrastructure. It's a training program based on the Canadian Network of Asset Managers. And we're very excited about that. Also part of this summit is going to be an international panel, and Robert will be coming back, but we wanted to give Robert a little bit of focus time before then. And then we need to get our next ALN Thursday at 3 lined up, but let's not worry about the next one. Let's focus on this one. Hi, Robert. Thanks for waiting through that long introduction. How you doing?
Excellent, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Well, I wish we had recorded our first conversation, because boy, were we clicking. But we'll try to recreate some of that magic with our usual opening question of, how did you get here? What brought you here in your asset management journey?
Well, it's definitely kind of been, I think like everybody, a long and torturous one, it seems. So a bit of background about myself is, I suppose about 20 years ago now, I actually started off my career in cadastral land management as a professional land surveyor. So my work was very much about helping, define land use, extensive property boundaries. How do we actually take land bases and appropriately manage them? And it's kind of funny that 20 years later, sounding an awful lot like that's the very first type of asset management is actually managing the land on which all the assets are based on. And then from there, I ended up migrating into the fields of 3D laser scanning, and in particular, mobile scanning, to create digital twins and really quickly start building roadside inventories. Just being able to cruise down a highway with a 3D laser scanner on a truck, and actually, as you're driving, create this sort of simulated reality of everything that you're passing by. And the interesting thing is
that was one of the reasons why I liked you so much, because of course it's about the information, and if you can visualize the information, even better. But anyway.
Absolutely, right. And but the interesting part about it was that a lot of my work was actually on the information gathering side of the fence, right? So you're out, you're collecting these billions of points, you're getting all of this very precisely georeferenced geospatial data, merging it all together. But then, like, what do you do with it? What's the point of all of this diorama building, right? Mm-hmm. And I was really fortunate that about 5 years ago, I ended up moving to a firm called McElhanney Limited. We're a relatively large engineering consultancy based in Western Canada. And I'm the manager of the Calgary engineering branch. So suddenly, I'm now working with all of these engineers, environmental scientists, landscape architects, planners, and I'm starting to see what we actually do with this information, right? Okay, so I'm not just collecting information about a road to have the world's most accurately mapped and modeled roadway. Like, this is going into answering a question. This is going to answer the question of, okay, how bad are my roads? Why are my roads bad in a certain way? Why am I taking all this CCTV camera information in these pipes? It's because I'm trying to assess, how much longer is a pipe going to actually last? And so that actually got me into what I call the end result of asset management, right? This whole pulling together all this stuff to actually answer questions, to come up with, what are my life cycle analyses? How much do I have to invest and where? And the really cool part about it, from an engineering perspective, we all get really excited about the numbers and the analytics and my Excel sheets and all of this. But the really interesting part is the policy part at the end of the day, right? Because it doesn't matter. The question that I always ask students in this introductory asset management course that I give at the University of Calgary, the very first question that I ask at the very beginning of the first lecture is, I put up a slide of a paved back alley and a gravel back alley. So, in the city that I'm in Calgary, I'd say about 50% of our alleyways in the backs are paved. The rest are dirt roads, right? And you ask the students.
And I saw this picture. So what it is, yeah, you sent me the presentation.
That's right. And so
just to describe it to people so that they understand, it's a residential neighborhood. The houses are in front, the garages are in back, and it's an image of a gravel alley leading to garages, or would you rather have a paved alley to your garages?
For sure, right? And actually, I'm going to just bring up that little diagram, because I think it's really, really important here, right? So, you ask that question. You ask which driveway would you prefer, the one that's paved or the one that's gravel? And the first thing everybody says in that class is they want the paved alley. Of course, I want the paved alley. The paved alley is modern. I can play road hockey on it, which, being from Canada, is like the #1 use of paved back alleys, right? But then we actually sit down and we ask the students, hey, so what is the purpose of an alley? And we go through and we realize, like, well, the only reason you actually have a back alley is to get access to your garage, to let the waste services come and pick up your recycling and your garbage. And in the neighborhoods here, we use the back alleys as a place where we bury our utilities. And that, you got your sewer and your gas and your water running through the back alley. So the back alley, paving it or not paving it, from a level of service perspective, is not actually going to the fundamental use of the back alley. So when I explain to the students, okay, now imagine we're going to pave that alley. As soon as you have to fix a utility, we're going to have to tear up the pavement, We're going to have to repatch it. So your beautiful alley 10 years later looks like a checkerboard of cuts and excavations and repaves. And by the way, your property taxes went up $2,000 a year now because we had to pay for this pavement. And then the response rate of would you really want a paved back alley drops right off the cliff, right? And I think that's the real interesting part about asset management is the numbers are important, but we're trying to actually calibrate what people actually want out of their services with regards to how much it's actually gonna cost.
How about a back alley with a trench that's got a metal cover that allows access?
Oh, now you can, but then suddenly that's not a very good hockey arena anymore, right? So like up here, it's just purely paved or nothing, because if the ball drops in there, and it's game over for all of us. So, but so as I say, like from my perspective, asset management is so much more than just purely a data science. The policy part's the really interesting thing. And right now, I've described this before, like, you know, it's kind of funny because I'm certain that a lot of the attendees on this webinar, you know, are old hands in the asset management world. Asset management isn't new, right? Like it's come out of reliability and maintenance engineering fields from 1970, and then we get into the 80s and we start to get looking at like, oh, hey, we should probably calculate disposal costs on our, you know, North Sea assets. And then we're coming into the 90s and starting to actually put together guidelines and such, right? So this kind of new buzz that's happening about asset management sometimes seems kind of weird that it's like the 8th iteration of the matrix. But what I think is really cool and very different is that what we know now is there's also a big push worldwide in terms of a recognition of the importance of sustainability and resilience, right? In terms of ESG. And of course, the UN a number of years.
ESG, environmental, social, and governance.
Yes, indeed.
And then I'm going to ask you to, you know, once you're through with this part, quickly, I wanted to come back to asking you about how you got here, and you've got the whole university side that you got to tell us about, but I'll let you do that after this.
Don't ruin the story. There's a whole narrative going down here. So absolutely, right? So what we start seeing over the last couple of years is a real focus on the importance of sustainability and ESG. The UN comes up with its sustainable development goals. And so now, if you keep asset management over to this side, and you take a look at kind of globally what we're looking for as a push towards minimizing impacts on your planet, sustainability has a real vague and nebulous feel to it. It's really susceptible to greenwashing, right? Everybody's falling over each other to say, oh yeah, we're doing things sustainably. We're doing things sustainably. We're ESG leaders, but there's no way to measure it. Now, certainly we're starting to see efforts with the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board in terms of trying to formalize the ways that you actually document and describe ESG. But you got to think like sustainability at the end of the day is, you know, what do they say? It's meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of or the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs. Okay, that sounds an awful lot like minimizing full life cycle impacts. And to me, I think that asset management is actually a key tool in driving sustainable outcomes, because at the end of the day, if we want to actually do the most we can with the money we have, the number one thing is extending your life of infrastructure, which means understanding clearly what are wants versus needs. And all the tools in our asset management practice provide the framework for us to actually be able to do that, right? So I think that, you know, we discussed last time, at the end of the day, it was tax evasion that undid Al Capone. So you can have these really neat outcomes out of what seems to be kind of like, you know, asset management's cool, but it's also an awful lot of accounting and a lot of like, you know, chasing numbers and doing analysis like that. But it can have such an impact, which I think is so cool.
Yeah, that's one of the ways that we bonded. I kind of was overexcited at the beginning, but you totally understood and agreed with me when I gave my far out explanation that we are facing a world of trouble together. And every organization in the world needs to improve the management of their assets in order for us to have a chance to avoid the trouble. And it seems crazy, but ISO 55000 actually can be used by every organization to do this. So it's not a silver bullet, but there's a path. There is a possibility here.
Absolutely, right? It's about changing your mindset. And if you think about, this certainly asset management is really, I would say, well adopted by private industries, because there they can really clearly attach like a dollar value to, hey, if I actually maintain my plant and equipment well, I can show life cycle cost savings. That makes my shareholders happy. Away I go. Municipalities, government organizations, things like that have a little bit more of a difficult time of it, because there's not that immediate feedback cycle of cost saving to shareholders happy to personal bonus, right? But when you think about how much infrastructure is managed by municipal, state, provincial, national governments, being even to just start to move the needle slightly in terms of those organizations minimizing their impacts by maximizing their the stretch of their infrastructure has an outsized impact on sustainable outcomes globally, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's really elegant.
Yes, Jim Dieter always says that if we just get, a small percentage improvement on the US federal, assets, that's huge. So, totally aligned. So before we get to Boyd Beal's provocative question about sustainability, tell us about you and how you got into the academic field and a PhD, and now you're trying to set up an asset management sustainability and infrastructure sustainability course.
Yeah, so I've been involved with the University of Calgary for the longest period of time. I received my doctorate there like back in 2000, if one can even imagine that far back, 2002 to be exact. But anyways, I've always been active in teaching and research and so on and so forth. And as I said, like in my journey, I had started from the cadastral management to the digital twins to getting into the asset management piece of the equation. And the one thing that I'd realized is that as an asset manager, one of the biggest pains in the rear that I go into is the fact that folks don't get asset management, right? Despite all our efforts, there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of raising awareness of like the effort involved in asset management. That asset management isn't just simply saying one day, hey, I want to do asset management, I'm buying a piece of software and I'm done asset management, right? This is a continual improvement process. This takes effort, this takes resources. It can't be done on the side of the desk. And what had occurred to me was that we really lack any graduate or undergraduate education for engineering students in particular on asset management principles, right? Like students get introduced to project management if you're coming out of a civil or mechanical stream or really any engineering discipline. We certainly have maintenance reliability specialists, but this sort of like more holistic approach to asset management is really not something that we're seeing at the university level. And fortunately, the University of Calgary supported the idea of creating a fundamentals of asset management course, a trial course, to give to graduate students, fourth-year students that want to kind of explore what topics in asset management are. And so we ended up rolling that out last September, 14-week, 3-credit course. And, it really gives you that high-level look in terms of what is asset management, what's level of service, what's risk, what are the stages of an asset life cycle, what's expected life, giving these students I like to use the term anatomy. I think that's a cool term when we talk about asset management, but this anatomy and this vocabulary to prepare them so that either when they drop out, like when they get out of that school and once they're dropped into industry, that they're hitting the ground running and can join our teams without having to educate everyone from the ground up. But also, even if they don't end up in asset management, I want these students to end up in municipal public works groups. I want them to end up on councils and such, so that when I'm going back to them and explaining like, hey, okay, you know what, by the way, your condition assessment program isn't something we're going to pull off once and then not do again for 5 years and expect everything to work out, that you've almost preceded these people to understand what needs to happen. And the really cool bit about that is we had 23 students attend in September from a variety of places. They came from civil engineering, from mechanical engineering, from chemical engineering, from geomatics or survey engineering. Feedback was good. And apparently it's looking like there's interest for about 75 students to take this course next September, right? Which I think is tremendous. If we can have 75 students a year being exposed to the fundamentals of asset management, I think that's really amazing, right?
That's a great start, but we need that at every university also. And we've had discussions here with Doug Getz and others. Doug Getz is a leading academic asset management academic proponent in the US. And we should maybe set up a academy or university asset leadership board, something that helps us share this across many universities. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about the program.
Yeah, for sure. So as I say, the very first course is this fundamentals of asset management and sustainability course, and we're going through stakeholder engagement and all of these good things. Thanks to the positive feedback from the first course and demand from that initial cohort, in April we're actually rolling out an advanced topics in asset management. So focusing on great, if I can use the term kids, you figured out how to establish levels of service, what's customer level of service, technical level of service, all this. Now, how are we going to rope this together into writing strategic asset management plans? How are we actually going to put together asset management policies? And then doing kind of that deep dive into ISO 55000, right? Like, how do I audit a policy and plan based on the principles of ISO? And so that'll be half the course. The other half of the course is going to be going further into a discussion of financial reporting basics, right? So income expense, depreciation, in particular, like from the public sector accounting board, there's idiosyncrasies in terms of how you report your tangible capital assets. And then a big topic up here in Canada, and I assume growing globally, is how do you account for natural assets, right? What's the value of a tree? A tree doesn't depreciate, it appreciates, but the replacement value is not the 200-year-old oak tree, it's the $50 sapling you buy from Holes, right? So how does that all work? And it's actually exciting. The CSA up here is right now looking at actually putting some standards in
CSA.
Canada. The Canadian Standards Association is actually striking a group to look at standardizing the valuation of natural assets. So we're going to expose the students to that, how ESG reporting works, because one of my big beliefs is right now we optimize life cycle costs based on currency, but in the future, it's just as likely that we're going to have to take into account things like operational carbon, right? What are your greenhouse gas emissions from your process? And we're going to actually use carbon as a proxy for currency in some life cycle decisions, right? So that's going to be the second course of kind of trying to tease out financial and strategy aspects in asset management. The overall goal is what we would like to do is actually create a little cluster of courses and research at the University of Calgary that focuses on sensors and data, software and analytics related to asset management, and in particular, policy and process, right? Because at the end of the day, I like to say that policy drives process. You're not doing condition inspection for the fun of it. You're doing it because there's a purpose. That purpose is enshrined in a policy. And so to pull this off, we would like to look at creating eventually a graduate certificate in asset management, which would require 4 courses at the graduate level. And so we've got 2 down. And right now we've struck an industry advisory group. And I encourage anyone who's interested in participating to reach out to me. I know our good friend Boyd is a member of this group, to help basically dial in what a curriculum would look like. What are these additional courses that students need to take so that they're ready to actually enter the asset management workforce? Because we don't want to just build something for building's sake. We want this to be meaningful. And the exciting part is, if we can get grad students interested in that, at the end of the day, industry gets trained people, but then we also end up with a whole pile of researchers that can actually independently look at topics in asset management, right? Like things like, how do you integrate environmental and sustainability impacts into life cycle decision making? How do you create open source data standards for the exchange of asset management data, right? All types of things that we can have then, a positive feedback cycle of students turning into researchers, training more students, going into industry, developing partnerships to really advance the industry.
Excellent. So we've only got a little bit of time in our regular program. We might go into overtime. Anita Kemp is an academic in Germany, and we might ask her to join. Anita, if you're willing to join in this discussion, will you put in the chat that we can make you a panelist? But Robert, will you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with McElhanney?
Yeah, certainly. So at McElhanney, I'm the chair of our asset management technical services group. So as I say, we're a civil engineering and geomatic surveying, landscape architecture, environmental consultancy. And for us, a really important aspect of serving the communities that we work in is providing asset management services, right? In particular in the First Nations context. And so at McElhanney, we're really trying to leverage the power of helping communities know what they're going to need to do to make their outcomes better, and linking that with the consulting engineering services that we can then provide by, developing safer water systems, more effective streets, and basically better places to live.
Excellent. What kind of clients do you have?
In general, we end up with clients in 3 main sectors. So we deal with clients in what we call transportation and transit. So, for folks in the States, it would be the DOTs and folks managing these major transportation corridors. Cities and communities is another major focal for us. So we deal with big cities. We deal with a lot of small communities. And that's kind of a real important sector for us, if you can call that a sector, because one of the things that's really interesting about our firm is that we have offices in all types of small communities. So we really pride ourselves on tight linkages in the places we live. And then as well, we work for a range of resource firms and activities, ranging from renewables to mines to all types of things.
Excellent. Well, I am going to close the program for those who have other things scheduled, but I've invited Annette to be a panelist, and want to introduce you to her. But Annette, before you start talking, let me share my screen. So thank you to Robert. Thank you to our patron members, our organizational members. Mark your calendars for February 28th for our roundtable on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Then February 22nd, we're starting our series of municipal web programs from around the world. And we're starting with the Greater Geelong. Then we've got so much going on that then we're going to have the summit. Now, I said Robert was on our international panel. I made a mistake. Robert is going to be on the transportation panel. because of all your experience with McElhanney. So, Annette had a question, and if she unmutes herself, then she'll be able to ask Clive.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak. And great, Robert, what you have set up in Calgary. I'm at a university in Germany, and my experiences are twofold. Organizations do have interest in well-educated people, but they never pay for research. And the question is, how are you going to teach stuff that is more than just practical? And how are you going to advance a field if you're not getting funds for the research and the researchers you need to pay usually? So that would be one of my most important questions. Thank you.
Very practical.
And hard out of the gate, I'm going to just point out, Annette, like kill an idea before it gets off the ground. But a very pragmatic point. So you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, programs can't work if they're not funded. And so there's two aspects to this. So as far as the actual curriculum part and the actual development of the courses, that is essentially revenue neutral, right? So this requires sessional instructors, professors at the university who are developing out courses to provide for students, and of course at the university framework that is done on a kind of a fee recovery basis. One of the interesting things at the University of Calgary in particular, and I think this is at other universities as well, is we have something called an open studies program that we allow, we essentially open up university courses for interested professionals to take at a reasonable cost. And this means that a working professional can register with Open Studies, take, for example, an asset management course, the cost is $800 or such, and they end up with a university credit. Those credits don't lead to a degree per se, because you'd of course have to be accepted in a faculty to make that work, but that does provide an opportunity for interested people to take university level education in what I'm going to call a university construct, right? So the way I see it, we have professional courses, which are great, and they tend to be compressed. They tend to be your 3-5 day type courses. There's a bit of a different learning experience when something's stretched over 14 weeks and sort of your classical, labs, exams, term papers, students way of being. So that covers off the teaching aspect. As far as the funding for the graduate students and the researchers and such, you're quite correct. So what we're looking at working on in the upcoming months is actually putting together a funding plan. And generally in Canada, I would say a significant proportion of research is in fact industrially driven, because we do have a very good government matching funding system. And so in many cases, industrial funds are matched 1-for-1 by various government programs, which defers the cost of investment a lot for those firms. That's kind of a roundabout way of answering your question. But in general, what we'll be looking at a funding model is having industrial sponsors who value the existence of this program, and then direct research contracts likely with people who want questions answered, and government funding agencies that want to support that development.
So Boyd Beal is about to check out, but we want to thank Boyd for introducing Robert to the ALN before he leaves. Thank you so much, Boyd.
And then Boyd's also asked a question about expanding the program to other universities. And the one thing that I'd like to just highlight is that, Dragan had mentioned as well that in Quebec, there is a program as well where there's a research cluster on asset management. And this is very true. However, I have not found beyond University of South Queensland, for example, a dedicated actual graduate certificate named in asset management. But one of the really interesting things that's happening in kind of a post-COVID world, or is it post-COVID, an endemic COVID world? I don't know. But whatever we're living in right now is I know at the University of Calgary, we're really becoming accustomed to a hybrid course delivery framework. And so, you know, doing things like this has become, and I hate the term the new normal, but effectively in the courses that I was giving in September, for example, as I said, we'd had 23 students. Of those, I know 4 of them were international, like literally located in other parts of the earth, because we can now, right? So I live streamed the lectures. 60% of the students will attend in person. The remainder men are watching on video. And I think, to Boyd's point, this actually provides a really interesting opportunity for universities to get together to collaborate so that we're not reinventing the wheel of creating every university has its own particular version of this course. It'd be really awesome from an asset management industrial perspective if we could actually get together a cluster of teachers and trainers who can, you know, provide these courses on a more global scale. Now, certainly, I'm just going to back that comment way back and point out that, you know, from an undergraduate perspective, universities have all types of accreditation criteria and requirements and so on and so forth. So it's not as simple as saying, cool, I'm at the U of C, cross-link my course over to, you know, Oregon State, and away we go. There's stuff to work through, but I think actually amassing a body of knowledge is really valuable.
We've got some other questions, but first I want to see, Annette, do you think that would be valuable with your university?
Yes, I already put it in the chat. I think we are all looking for international collaboration, and especially I think for people and for companies and users, it would be good to have the exchange also on the student level, not only the international experience of the instructors, but really to get into contact and build up a network. I think it could be valuable for everybody, but we have to make sure that we also get the research on ground, because I really hate to teach something that is only practical experience and has not been like validated, and we have no numbers on whether it works and stuff like that. So doing real research would be something that would need to be added.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, I think a couple really interesting developments is at the ISO 55000 level, Working Group 8 is currently looking at producing, oh, don't quote me, an ISO 55012 standard, maybe, on, for example, people involvement and competency. So we're starting to see, you know, a greater awareness of kind of bringing educators together.
And with asset management being, as you said, the latest version of asset management getting such attention, and it's actually a relative new field, the way it's being presented out of ISO 55000, this could be a very fertile ground for establishing these interrelated university programs that share and collaborate. So the Asset Leadership Network would love to be able to make these kinds of connections as we are with Annette and Robert. So there was a question from Cecilia about the course and whether there are plans for dealing with stakeholder relationship management. That's, yes, you get it, Robert, I'll let you go.
Yeah, for sure. And Cecilia, I think that's a really neat thing to highlight, right? As I'd mentioned earlier, it's the soft part of asset management that's often the least well taught, I think. And so in, for example, the fundamentals course that we provided, the students had a full, just purely dedicated week to stakeholder engagement. And in particular, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the IAP2 spectrum for public engagement, but we had actually brought in IAP2 trained people to actually run students through engagement exercises and really kind of try to highlight the importance that that, you know, the first part of ISO 55000 is defining scope, but like a big part of that defining scope is in, you know, defining your stakeholders and appropriately engaging with them.
Yes. To that end, Cecilia and I had a call yesterday with the Be Me group, and they've got an asset framing approach that helps people frame a problem. It's not a physical or an intangible asset. It's how you approach a situation. And if you say the problem is, then everything's going to be related to a problem, a problem, a problem. That's deficit framing. Talk about what's wrong. Asset framing says, well, if we fix the roads, more trucks can come and we can get more goods to the people who need them. And that mentions fixing the roads, but it doesn't focus on the fact the roads are horrible. It mentions what happens when the roads are improved and the impact on the economy. And then people are focusing on the asset of what you're working on, not the deficit. And that's a cultural issue that Cecilia and I are going to be working with to see how we can marry training about these soft parts that Jesse Rothkopf says are the hard parts, in conjunction with the engineering technical side. So this is really exciting work. And so thank you, Robert, for doing what you have done, agreeing to participate further. And I think this is only the beginning. Maybe if we set up some type of university asset leadership board or something, we can have Dragon and Annette and you and others get together with Doug Getz and see what we can do to not have to have all these universities recreate the wheel. And it was really exciting meeting you last week after Boyd's introduction. This call has not slowed my love affair with you down at all, and look forward to your participating in the program at the summit. Annette, thank you for staying up late in Germany to join us, and actually for jumping in and asking some questions. So thank you very much. And thanks to the audience. We had a very strong attendance for this, and clearly there's a lot of interest, and we'll be coming back to this again. Thank you, Robert.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.